Gaming culture has been singled out by many, especially recently, as being pretty toxic. To many on the outside, gaming looks like a hive of angry teenagers screaming obscenities and bragging about the things they've done to your family members.
To your dad. That's the buzzword.
That's the hot one. That's the moment. And according to one game designer, the toxic community and, more pertinently, the YouTube personalities that they follow are making developers afraid to talk more openly about their games.
Charles Randall is a game designer and programmer who has worked for Ubisoft and BioWare. He's had a hand in some acclaimed games like Assassin's Creed 2 and Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Over the weekend, Randall went on a bit of a Twitter rant about how the gaming community believe game developers are overly secretive about the development process. But Randall believes game developers are only secretive because they're afraid of the toxic reaction they can expect from the gaming community. He said game developers are open and transparent, but only to people working within the games industry, their friends and peers.
As part of a series of tweets, Randall said, "We're only candid with other industry people because gamer culture is so toxic that being candid in public is dangerous." See that recent Twitter thread about game design tricks to make games better? Filled with gamers angry about being lied to. Any dev who talks candidly about the difficulty of something like that just triggers a wave of people questioning their entire resume. Questioning here being an absurd euphemism for becoming a target of an entire faction of gamers for harassment or worse. There are still topics I can't touch because I was candid once and it resulted in dumb headlines, misunderstandings and harassment.
What Randall's talking about here is probably a couple of years ago when he accused Shadow of Mordor of stealing code from Assassin's Creed 2. He made a couple of tweets about it. It's quite a drastic accusation to make, and you can see where he's left himself open to criticism on that by providing no evidence whatsoever. He said, I know the code when I see it, was his defense of his accusations. So he's opened himself up to criticism there, isn't he? That's what I think. Randall then recalled a public talk he gave about development to a room full of kids. After the talk, a teenager walked up to him and told him how game developers are bad, because that's what a YouTuber he watches said. According to Randall, the kid hit all the buzzwords like bad engines and being greedy. He then goes on to say that he tried to explain the development process to the kid and that all those things he said are normal things gamers worry about. Randall then capped off by saying, "But I expect he went back to consuming toxic culture via YouTube personalities, and one day he'll probably harass a dev over nonsense." Some strong words there, some of which we can't help feel a little bit defensive about, because he's kind of making out that we're all bad and we're all generating this toxicity, which a bit of a stretch, isn't it?
I think if he's really got a problem with it, a Twitter thread is about the most annoying way of going about it. I'm getting really annoyed with Twitter threads generally, but if that's how you feel about it, then surely there's a solution that you be more open and be more kind of transparent yourself and generate goodwill rather than kind of being a recluse and being all secretive. I don't personally think that developers are too secretive. I think it's just about right where they are right now. I mean, they show off certain parts of the game, they give you enough information. The reason they hold information back for me is because they just want to flip and keep things tight with their marketing schedule and stuff. They want to get the pre-orders out there at the right date and everything, and they want to make sure that we're all nice and excited at just the right times on the calendar so that we lay a pre-order down and buy it on day one. I mean, to say that the only reason that developers don't talk more openly about games is because gamers are assholes, that's not the whole picture, surely.
One thing's for sure, I mean, he's right. Gaming culture is overly toxic. Jeff Kaplan's come out and addressed it recently with the Overwatch thing, and they're addressing it in their game. There's a lot of toxicity in some gaming communities. This is my problem with what he's saying. He's been overgeneralizing here and saying that the whole gaming community is toxic and that it's all because of the YouTubers, which is plain basically wrong. He's got a good point in there somewhere, but he's surrounded with all this bullshit that the correctness is lost. I think at the end of the day, if you're more open and transparent with your game and your development process, rather than being more like secretive about it, you're more likely to win favor. If you've got things to hide, then obviously you want to be hiding shit, because we're here as personality, as YouTubers, to provide the checks and balances to make sure people aren't doing shitty things, a la No Man's Sky, a la Alien Colonial Marines. That's the kind of thing that we're here to do, to highlight. And if you're scared of that, then surely you've got some skeletons in your closet.
The big problem is they can't talk about the development process while the game is being developed, right? While it's being worked on, yeah? A lot of the time you are taking money off people, or you're taking a pre-order, a pledge to buy the game in that period, right? So you can get people excited enough to buy the game while you're working on it. So if you say, oh, this is going to be in the game, and then it's not, kind of fair enough if people are upset about that, because they've put money money down already, and they're invested in something that you said is going to be in the game and then it's not. So it's not just that they're upset that you changed their mind, they're upset because they put money down or they were ready to buy it, they've pre-ordered it, and then it's not there. So the product they thought they were getting isn't what they are actually getting. In a separate article on the same topic, respected games journalist Jason Schreier said during his time interviewing game developers, he found that developers are candid about their games, but only once they've been released. According to Schreier, before and during the release of games, developers are afraid of becoming the next No Man's Sky or getting roasted by a YouTube personality for something that they said. A developer on Reddit also responded to Randall's Twitter comments, saying he found that a lot of the toxicity towards game developers comes from a lack of understanding about how game development works. He said social media users often get upset at things the developer has no control over, like the marketing, for instance. He also mentions how game designers are restricted in their communication because the slightest slip-up can cost them their job. So of course in their eyes it's not worth speaking publicly because the risk is just too high. The anonymous developer gave the example of Adam Orth, who back in 2013 lost his job as creative director of Microsoft Studios after he made sarcastic comments about the always online plan for the Xbox One and insulted people who opposed the plan. There certainly is a disconnect between kind of the developers, the industry, the people who make the games, and the people who consume them. That is clear to see. And this guy is talking here about how negativity and how negative headlines, YouTube titles, thumbnails, all that sort of stuff is kind of influencing the community to be more toxic about the games and the developers that are being worked on, and so that makes the whole thing a bit more hostile. He certainly does have a point because there's kind of, you know, excitement around negativity on things like YouTube and stuff. Like the way the internet is built is around getting people to click on your stuff and watch stuff and read your articles and watch your videos. That is not isolated to gaming, that is just the entire internet, all of news and everything. That's how it works, and that is kind of having a negative effect there, and he's clearly upset about it.
I mean, the way that I feel on this situation is he's got a good point, but he's muddied it with accusations. I don't like the way that's gone about. It's kind of hypocritical in a way, where he's blaming people for doing things, the exact thing that he's doing here on Twitter, which is being overly negative and critical towards another group of people. What I would say to Randall is, if you are watching this by any stretch, we'd love to have a conversation with you. I'd love to interview, to talk to you in depth about what the problems actually are, because the solution to this is, and everybody needs to understand exactly how it works in more detail. Like, for example, people always complain that games are too expensive, but I mean, there's information out there that games are like horrifically expensive to produce these days, and I'd like to know a little bit more. Why don't you tell us how expensive games are, so that will enlighten us, that would take the frustration away from this subject for us.
Another issue as well is just the language that we use. So he says specifically that, you know, the kid that he'd talked to was like, being greedy and developers are bad and whatever, but a lot of that's language, right? And so they're getting confused there with something like, you know, for a recent example, for example, is Shadow of War, right? Warner Brothers are copping a load of flack of people like us, of Jim Sterling, of the, you know, the wider community, complaining about the microtransactions in that game. And Monolith, the people who are actually making the game, they're having to just deal with that. They're making the game, they're trying to make the game fun, and they're having to deal with the microtransaction system as well. They're the developer in that situation, but you can see how they would be a bit more defensive and scared about talking and saying certain things because of the microtransaction model that Warner Brothers put on the game. So the whole business is a bit more complicated than it seems on the surface, and that can lead to misunderstandings. You know, like he said, the developer getting abuse and getting called out on, you know, Twitter or whatever, when it's not really anything that they've done.
We don't ever want to be accused of generating some sort of hatred and toxicity in the community.
Definitely not.
That's not what we're here for. We're here to enlighten people. If they end up being toxic based on the information that we provide them, that's our responsibility. We're being as balanced as we can a lot of the time. But
just don't ever do that though. Don't ever harass people.
That's the kind of message. That's the message.
Just chill out is the main thing.
Yeah, let's just put the kettle on, let's sit around a table and talk this thing through, because I find that's the best way. You like, in my marriage, you know, we have conflict. Everyone has conflict in you know, friendships, everything. Sit down and have a cup of tea.
It's the solution to so many problems.
World peace. Right there, guys, I've solved it. Tea.
Alright, so now that you're waiting for the kettle to boil, why don't you let us know down in the comments how you feel about all this. Remember to like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this every single day. There's another video right there which you could watch right now, and a link to Patreon if you want to support the channel. See you next time.